there are more mainframe transactions going through mainframes every single day than there are Google searches every single day. So
Wow.
there are still huge amounts of data going through mainframes. So batch processing, every single time you use a credit card or a debit card, 90% of those are going through a mainframe.
It would be great to talk about cybersecurity. It's an area that a lot of software engineers don't understand. So what do we mean by cybersecurity?
Well, cybersecurity for me is purely the protection of almost all of our digital assets that are there. So it can be anything from penetration testing, which is offensive security, that is where I'm coming from, cyber threat intelligence, and anything that can secure infrastructure, the other systems that are there, and of course, all the code that's at the back end as well. Because, I mean, everything, although the pieces of tin are sitting there, the code is the most important thing that actually drives all of these sort of things. So when it comes to cyber security, just think of it as security, but in the digital world. That's just how I see it.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it too. All the time when we think of security, you think of these kind of Hollywood films with a heist and people breaking into a bank vault. But in the digital realm, you don't have to do that. You could be in a different country, couldn't you? And,
absolutely.
yeah.
It's completely different now. I mean, once upon a time, if you wanted to break into a mainframe or you wanted to break into a computer system, you had to go in through the front door and then go through a few other security guards, etc. And now you're coming in through the digital pathways in order to get to the internal network. Yeah, absolutely.
There's two ways to do this then. There's the physical attack, walk in the building and attack it. And there's the over the internet or over some kind of externally accessible network. I know one company I worked with years ago was actually physically attacked in that people turned up with a van, walked in, and rather brazenly told the guy on the front desk they were here to correct some servers, who actually let them in the server room, and they walked out with the servers. And the security guard helped them carry them out through sheer confidence. That's a fairly unique story that I haven't come across elsewhere. How much of what you see these days is that physical attack of walking in the building versus accessing it remotely?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably less. So, for example, I used to do quite a lot of social engineering about 20 years ago. One of the jobs that I had to do was actually for one of the companies I was working for. One of the subsidiaries was in Canada. And so part of that was actually to see if I could get into the building physically, wander upstairs, sit down in the cubicle, because it was Canada, they've got cubicles, obviously. Could I plug myself into the network? What could I do from there? And, that was successful. There's other people I know who do a brilliant job like that, which is like people like Brian Harris, who runs the covert access team. A lot of the times these days, any of our red teaming, which is an kind of advanced type of penetration testing, it's through phishing attacks. We would set up a website, get someone come to that website, and then, or we would send an email and we would just basically get onto the machine at whatever infrastructure or whatever place of work they are at. And then we are potentially free to roam the network, depending on how good the security internally is. Because, we've all got a good perimeter, but maybe sometimes a soft underbelly, which is a bit of a problem there. So it's a big thing. So I would say most of the time now, if you're doing a penetration test or you're trying to breach a network, you're going to do it by using users and their weaknesses.
So you mentioned social engineering there, which is a term I'm sure a lot of people will not have come across. And I first heard of the term, I think, in the late 90s. Was it Kevin Mitnick, I think?
Yes.
Hacked the Pentagon by a lot of social engineering, I believe. So what do we mean by social engineering?
Basically, pretending to be someone that you are not. It's almost like acting in order to gain access to something. Kevin Mitnick was a brilliant actor. He was very confident. He was able to pick up the telephone tell people he needed something, they were convinced enough to say, okay, here you are. Here's the keys to whatever, or here's the code to whatever. I think he very famously managed to steal the code to the Motorola StarTAC mobile phone back in 1996, 1997, because they thought he was supposed to have it. So it's that sort of acting thing. So it's social engineering a person to give you what they're not supposed to. You know what I mean? So it's still very important today.
What amazed me about that is, just, as you say, that was 1996, 97. In the 2010s, I worked for a company. I won't name them, and I'll try not to be too specific to give it away. And I was working remotely at the time, one day, and they had some good security practices, like or at least what was considered good at the time. Like our passwords changed every 3 months. We had to update them and change them, and our passwords had to be 16 plus characters.
Yeah.
Perhaps you can answer whether or not that's good security in a moment after I've told you the story. We had that, and I was working on Windows Remote Desktop. Windows Remote Desktop crashed, or my internet dropped halfway through me changing my password, which left me without access. I was shocked then, nearly 15 years later after the social engineer from Kev Milne. I phoned up the reception of the company because I didn't have a number for anyone else, asked to be put through to the IT department, and explained to them, hey, I'm changing my password, I've got locked out, can you reset my password? And they said yes, and gave me a new password over the phone. And I was shocked at that point in dealing with a company that, very high value, big company, suppose lots of security, just reset my password and gave me a password, no verification who I was. Could have been anyone, phone at the public reception. So it still worked then. And I've seen it more recently with another company I did some consulting for. Again, they had a red team in, which I'll ask you to explain red teaming as well in a minute, if that's okay, who did the same. They contacted people and said, hey, I'm the CEO, I need you to do something. And a scary number of people in the company actually did that without verifying who it was. So it seems that social engineering is still a huge problem.
Definitely is. In terms of security, you should have probably had slightly more security on that. They should have been able to do some sort of two-factor authentication with you, such as, okay, right, you're saying that you are this user, you have a badge with a user ID, and on the back of that badge there should be some other code or code word that you should be able to, provide that code or code word to them to prove, to say who you are, because you're the only owner of that user ID or that badge. But I've seen the case that they don't just do that. I mean, they should be asking for your internal user ID, obviously, and sometimes they just don't. They take your name, and there you are. It's like, oh, great, so you are SLB558 or something like that, and then that's fine. Yes, I am. Off you go.
Yeah,
your user on your end. That'd be a bit of a disaster. People should know slightly better these days, but it's not always the case, especially with small to medium enterprises.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And what scared me is both of these were big companies that had invested in cybersecurity training. And you're right, two-factor would have been perfect, because in the first case, I had one of those RSA tags that generating a new number every minute. That would have been very easy, surely, to ask for that and verify that I was in possession of that tag and the right person.
Definitely.
It's interesting.
Definitely.
Yeah, so you mentioned red teaming then as well. What is that for anyone that doesn't know, please?
So you've got sort of three different levels, I would say, of scanning, penetration testing, and then advanced penetration testing. So at the lowest level, let's just say you've got vulnerability scanning. I don't know if you've heard the name Nessus or Qualys, etc. These are scanning engines. They will scan a computer system. They will just basically give you a report back. That report, unfortunately, doesn't have any context, right? So that's vulnerability scanning. The next phase is penetration testing, where you have a very well-defined scope, and you will maybe be looking at a few different systems or a web application or maybe APIs or something like that. And as part of the penetration test, you will do a vulnerability scan as well. It's tightly scoped, right? A red team, that is usually coming from external, and in the style of Kevin Mitnick, all bets are off. The scope is much wider, so you can have things like just get into the building, right? Just exploit. Tell me what you can do. Can you get into the voice over IP systems? Can you get into, can you get the databases at the back end? What else can you do? So that can encompass everything from the social engineering that we've just talked about, to setting up websites externally, trying to get users to come to those websites, and then you've got a drive-by compromise, or sending phishing emails. And the difficulty now is, since the rise of AI, phishing emails and other things like that have gone from last year, as part of my cyber threat intelligence role, we monitor all these things, has gone from 12% success rate to 54% success rate. So it's getting really, really tight these days. It's very difficult to stop some of these very intelligent attacks. And so that's basically what red teaming is. It's all bets are off. Let's see how we can get in. So the scope is much wider.
Yeah, many years ago, I talked to a few people who were doing that, and that included things like they'd turn up at the office pretending to be there for interviews, or they'd walk in pretending to be engineers to fix something, and they'd try and plug in to vulnerable network sockets or connect to Wi-Fi's. And it was kind of scary how many companies that they said they could literally walk up to reception, pretend to have a legitimate reason, and then be allowed in and be allowed to wander around offices.
Yeah, I mean, I think the story from the Canada office for the company that I worked for, that their security was really tight. However, they had a coffee shop which looked onto the reception. So I sat in the coffee shop for the day before that I was due to meet the IT security manager, and just watched the pattern, the sort of security guard rotation pattern, looked at the comings and goings, etc. I already knew what the badges looked like, so I had all that sort of thing. So the later on, at the end of the day, I was able to just look at the shift pattern, what was the best sort of time to actually access the office, tailgated into the office, got in, and was able to find a cubicle that was not being used. As soon as you've got a cubicle around you, that's it. Nobody knows you're there. Plug my laptop in. That should have been another security, something that would have been protected, such as plug your laptop in, you've got no network connection. That was there still, because they assumed that once you're in, you're in. But good report came off the back of that, and they fixed all these sort of things. Barriers were added, etc. Yeah, it was good fun though. It's quite scary though, doing that sort of thing. And Brian Harris, who does this all the time, who works for certain governments, he tells amazing war stories about being in lifts with, surrounded by guards with M5s, not knowing that he's not supposed to be there. So he's got some amazing stories on social engineering and other things like that as well. So it's good, really entertaining.
I'm sure they'd be fascinating to hear, because it sounds very James Bond, and it must be quite a tense thing in many. What if you get caught? Are they going to call the police? At what point do you call in your whatever executive support you've got to say that you are allowed to be there breaking in, if you see what I mean?
Absolutely is. And he's still doing things like teaching lock picking and breaking in safes, and it's very James Bond stuff. But kind of scary.
Cool. So if we made cybersecurity sound attractive to anyone that wants to get into this as a career, hopefully on the white hat good side, what is the path that people can take to get into cybersecurity? Because I believe we still have a shortage of expertise in this area. So how can people establish a career? What do they need to do?
Well, it's really strange. I mean, I fell into cybersecurity. I wanted to be a PE teacher, right?
Okay, that's a story I have to hear.
So I wanted to be a PE teacher. Unfortunately, there was like 1,500 people going for 80 places. And of those 80 places, 74 men got in to to be PE teachers, to train as PE teachers that year. So I was like, okay, I'm not going to get in here. So I went off and did a youth training scheme, a YTS. Something we've got in the UK. It's probably slightly before your time. They managed to remove it, but I mean, it's almost like an apprenticeship, and it wasn't great. So then my girlfriend's father at the time was sort of pivoting into IT. And I thought, oh, that sounds great. I'm going to get out of this YTS. I went to college to do IT. He didn't bother going along to the class in the end. So I did that and then shifted on from there. And security was something that I was always really interested in. Now, we're talking about 1992. So cybersecurity wasn't a word that existed at all. IT security kind of was, but only in terms of, somebody's got a firewall, so that was where your security was. There was almost nothing else. And certainly in coding terms, nobody really coded for security even back in the early 90s, as far as I'm aware anyway, to be honest. So how do people get into it these days? I think, everybody in my team, I used to work at Standard Life, and my manager had a degree in geography. I was a penetration tester, and I had wanted to be a PE teacher, and my skills were on history. And the analyst I worked with, he had a degree in medieval history. So I think it's probably slightly different. I think you probably need to have a degree of some sort. It doesn't necessarily need to be cybersecurity. It doesn't need to be any of these things, but a degree seems to be the standard. What I would then do, and this is what I sort of say to people who I'm mentoring quite a lot of people at the moment, and I have done, I would always say get the foundations in. To be a penetration tester, especially, you've got to understand where your target is. You've got to understand how to get to your target. And then you've got to understand what to do when you get there, right? So you really need to understand networking. You need to understand lots of different server types. And, get some coding in there, absolutely. Get some, especially Python coding, and shell scripting and various other things like that as well. Get the fundamentals, and then the world is more open at that point, because there are so many different facets to cybersecurity: cyber threat intelligence, cyber threat hunting, penetration testing, still firewalling and infrastructure security, all of these things. So you probably need a little bit of luck, and you need a bit of drive to make a decision where you're going to go. But in the meantime, get all the fundamentals there. Understand how infrastructure works, understand how code works, and understand how the network works. And once you've got those, grabbing the other certifications that you can, like CompTIA and maybe OSCP if you want to be very specific. But these are all very good to go and do, definitely.
So as you're talking that, I'm thinking cybersecurity is actually a massive field. So we've talked about the red teaming and the social engineering and the kind of acting skills and the social skills and that emotional intelligence. So that's very much a people-focused element. You've talked about the networking and Python and that level of code. Then there's the low-level code we could think about, where you as we were mentioning before the call, thinking about maybe your C programmers and that low-level understanding, exploiting things like perhaps buffer overloads and getting low-level code.
Absolutely.
And then there's even lower than that in the people that are doing hardware. So I'm wearing the hoodie from a hardware manufacturer, and we had people pen testing the products we're building that were security related by attacking the physical device and looking at how they could inject stuff into the hardware and attack the hardware to extract data from it. Again, very different level of attack, and you'd need some of those other skills to get to the hardware. But as we all have a mobile phone here now that's got some level of security with data on, if somebody can get your phone, the hardware security is perhaps increasingly relevant as well.
Yeah, absolutely. As you say, you've got phones here, right? And what people forget is, a lot of your two-factor authentication, your authentication systems, whether it's your Gmail account or it's your work account if you work for a bank like myself. A lot of these things are there. You can't afford to lose your phone. Your contacts are there. Your security is there. All the other things is there. Phone is now, you don't need your key fob anymore. You've got your two-factor authentication on your phone. And that is, if something goes wrong, it's like, hey, we'll send you a text. It's like, well, I haven't got my phone. So, you know what I mean? You're absolutely right. These things are really important.
Yeah, I bet RSA never had on their business risk assessment that mobile phones would destroy their business for key fobs.
That is absolutely it. I remember on my key fob for many years. Then somebody said, you don't need that now. You've got your phone. So there you go.
Yeah, okay. So we've talked a lot about these different issues. So what should businesses have pen tested? Which businesses should be thinking about it? What's your view on that?
Everybody should have that. Yeah, I mean, everybody should think about penetration testing. The problem is, some businesses obviously can't afford to do that sort of thing. But for me, security is just simply a part of doing business. Especially now, if you look at all the ransomware groups that are currently on the go, never mind nation states that are targeting bigger businesses, we've seen Marks and Spencer, and we've seen the Co-op and Harrods, and everybody hit in the last few weeks. Now, we were looking at that and we're going, well, are these specifically targeted? And it's like, not really. What happens is a vulnerability comes out in either a piece of code or some sort of service that's running, and then they use it again and again and again, and they get lucky. And I've seen it a few times. Some businesses where I've said to them, you really need to get a penetration test here, and they've ended up exploited, and their business has been down for 3 months. It's like people have got into the voice over IP systems. They can't telephone anybody. There's no access to their data. You know what I mean? So it's really important that you get some sort of security assessment, and it can't just be a tick the box type assessment. It's got to be let's see what we can do here and make sure you're secure on the outside. But equally now, user awareness is really, really important, because AI is getting better and better at actually providing emails and other things for attackers to use. I'm gathering open source intelligence across LinkedIn. You know what I mean? So yeah, everybody should have
it's scary. It's scary how much information you can get from those open source.
Absolutely.
Open source intelligence, isn't it?
Absolutely. And it's just become easier because of things like ChatGPT. So for example, I used to do a lot of research across, LinkedIn. If I was specifically targeting someone for a penetration test, right? Now you can use some of the ChatGPT, for example, Deep Research or Copilot Deep Research, and say, go off, find me everything you possibly can about X company, and also get me the employees, get me who's relevant to this technology or this developer type, and provide the evidence that you're not lying and hallucinating to me. And you've got a report, so you've got something you can really dig into really quickly. So yeah, it's these have become a force multiplier for certainly attackers. We need to catch up with that a little bit.
Yeah, and that makes it a challenge, doesn't it? That this is not we do this project and we're done. It's an ongoing thing you have to continue to invest in. And I like that you brought up Marks and Spencer's, because that statement you said of a lot of companies feel they can't afford it. I don't know how Marks and Spencer's felt, but I just pulled it up. That cyber attack was estimated to have cost them £400 million.
That's right.
I mean, you maybe feel you can't afford the testing and the development of cybersecurity, but can you afford not to when you have that kind of level of cost and the sheer risk involved?
I mean, there's been several companies, small to medium enterprises, who've been hit by ransomware attacks, and that's been the end of the business. And they've been on the go for, I think there was one, I can't remember, it'd been on the go for 120 years, and one cyber attack finished it. They just couldn't continue. They couldn't get their systems back up and running. They'd lost so much data that was the end of the company. So, I mean, much as a small to medium enterprise is someone who may think, well, let's sort of cut back on the security a little bit. You can't do that. And the same sort of things happening with councils as well. They've got less budget for cybersecurity, and they're an easy target for Russian ransomware groups or infrastructure groups who just want to cause problems to the UK infrastructure. You know what I mean? So
yeah, absolutely. And again, just talking about small businesses, one of the times I thought a bit more about security was I joined a small startup that had some disgruntled employees. And I was kind of shocked to walk into this startup and find the Wi-Fi password hadn't been changed in several years. And everyone that had ever worked at the company had root access to the main server because it was like, we're flat, we share everything, there's no hierarchy. Yeah, but you've got disgruntled ex-employees and a Wi-Fi that I can access from the pub across the road. You know, that's a vulnerability. You've got a responsibility to your investors to actually, you know, run this business in a professional manner. So
absolutely, and it's really strange things that, you know, especially when Wi-Fi came in as well. I used to do a lot of Wi-Fi penetration testing, and I also used to look for rogue Wi-Fi access points and things like that. And the company I worked for was right in the middle of, right in the centre of Edinburgh. And all around Edinburgh, there's hundreds of pubs around where we were and different businesses. And obviously all that Wi-Fi information is leaking in and out. And the problem was the company decided some people would just use Wi-Fi to connect to the system. First thing the Windows system did was go up and connect off to some of the pub across the road, right? And there was other connections into the network. So it actually turned out, one of the pen tests that I found was the pub across the road was connected directly into the insurance company's network. You know, there's a lot of things you just got to be careful with all the time, especially when you're deploying a new technology, because you may think you know what it's doing, but you know what, it's like usually it's baby steps to suddenly find, oh my goodness, I didn't even think that would be an issue.
Yeah, it's so easy, isn't it, to miss those things when it's new. So, switching to a completely different context, there's this myth amongst a lot of software engineering and a lot of people in tech that mainframes are dead. We stopped using those decades ago. This is something I've pushed back about, as we talked about earlier, and I was quite surprised. Again, I've never dealt with mainframes really. To find about a year ago when I looked that mainframes were at the peak, the highest level of sales that there's ever been. So as we all think that mainframes don't exist anymore, what's the security like on them? What are the challenges with securing a mainframe in this day and age?
So, I mean, the security in the mainframe can be absolutely excellent. Okay, well, one thing, you've got your two things here. Okay, so everybody thinks that the mainframe is right now being migrated out to cloud, right? And cloud can cost an absolute fortune, especially if you try to run the amount of transactions and batch jobs that a mainframe does. So just to sort of give a little bit of context, mainframes. There are more mainframe transactions going through mainframes every single day than there are Google searches every single day. So there are still huge amounts of data going through mainframes. So batch processing, every single time you use a credit card or a debit card, 90% of those are going through a mainframe, right? And that's one of the reasons that it's so quick, that you can tap a card and off it goes. It can go straight through the mainframe, get an approval, and come back. On your mortgages or your salaries or any of these sort of things are going through the mainframe, right? So if you think about what would happen if a mainframe was taken down or breached, considering you link them also to ATMs and other things like that, you've suddenly got a real problem there whereby everything grinds to a halt. So, and the other thing is, people just think that mainframes sit in the bowels of the network somewhere. Well, that's not the case. They're linked now to APIs at the front end. They're linked to, you know, web applications that are doing banking. They're hospitals will use it, healthcare services will use mainframes, and obviously companies such as airports, they're also using mainframes for booking services as well. So they're absolutely everywhere. How's the security in mainframes? It's difficult to say the security on mainframes. It can be really, really tight. Everything can potentially be there. I've heard that they can be the most securable system. I would say they're as securable as any other system. It depends how much functionality you want to have within the system, right? The other thing is you will sometimes find that because it's supposed to be backward compatible, right back to 1964, literally when the first IBM 360 mainframe came out, it was using COBOL and job control language and all the rest of it. That same COBOL or job control language will run on the modern mainframes, which are massively powerful systems, right? That becomes a code problem though, because people can say, well, it works and it's fast. So why would we change this? Nobody will get in anyway. So that is really where they can fall down. So they can be very securable, but also apathy, I think, and an aging generation of mainframers who think that, you can't get into the network, therefore we're secure, will potentially reduce the security depending on the company culture, I think.
I guess you've probably also on the software side got a bunch of people like me, and that I would very vehemently argue if you have working software that's that mission critical, you need a damn good reason to change it, and you need a very good testing process if you're going to change it, and don't just relight it for the sake of it. So I think certainly if I was managing a project like that, I'd have that tension of I want security, I want to be on board with that. But if we break something that's processing all those transactions he's talking about, so there's that real tension, I guess, isn't there, in the risk reward and how you balance that choice between security and don't break anything.
Absolutely, and you've got to be careful how you do the migration, because I mean, I think the best example lately was when Elon Musk was saying, right, we need to upgrade, we need to get rid of all this COBOL stuff, and we need to upgrade to brand new systems, etc. And I think they went to change the American social security system, at least in one of the big states, and there was billions of lines of COBOL code. And it went completely wrong and locked every social security system and really caused huge amounts of damage. They then realized, hey, we can't actually just move that. But it was a standard sort of, Doge thing. Let's go in, remove it all. Oh no, we've caused a bit of a problem here. We better put it back. And that's what happened. So I mean, it's as simple as that. COBOL's not going anywhere at the moment. There is, obviously there's a push to do standard Java web front ends and all the rest of the stuff. And there are API connectors that connect back into customer information control system and DB2, and we're still using SQL, etc. Mainframe can run all of that. It can run all the modern languages, but there's still a requirement at the minute for some job control language and COBOL and Rex and all things like that in there as well.
And I suppose every single one of those seams, when you're going from Java to COBOL or Python to COBOL or some of the other things, are also another vulnerability. You could have you'll think there's some security there and it's not be. Yeah. And the phrase that came to mind right at the beginning of this conversation that you hinted at is security, to my mind, has always been about it should be something in depth. It shouldn't just be, here's the wall and we assume nobody can get past it. But here's our firewall, if you will, on the cyber point of view. Then here's that encryption behind it. And then the more secure systems have got better encryption. That layers of defense, assuming that people will get past one or two. And again, that's why, if you're going to business, we have that second check. Shouldn't just be one person signs the checks. It should be a couple of people. So you build that defense in depth to every level of it.
Yeah.
It seems that's still not that common.
Yeah, that is the key phrase that we keep saying, because only one needs one weakness to let an attacker in. That's the problem there. So you've got to have your defense in depth, and sometimes you can find the perimeters very strong, but the internal systems and internal networks are not great, and you'll even be able to find code with if you wander along the intranet, you'll be able to find code with keys in it or passwords in it or developer comments that says, oh, this unlocks such and such. So I mean, everything all the way through, you've got to really look at these sort of things, because it only takes one weakness for the attacker to succeed. And we've got to find it all. That's the thing. So it's a pretty huge skill set that you need within certainly a penetration tester and anybody doing offensive and defensive security.
And I guess AI is further adding, based on what you said before, AI is further adding to that problem, in that all that analysis you did before, you'd have to do manually or grepping things, looking for patterns. Now you can take anything you get, chuck it into AI, and potentially search for vulnerabilities a lot quicker, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. AI has been it's great for me because I'm not a great coder, right? So it's helped me look at various security issues, etc., and also knock up quick little coding projects or things like that. Go too far and it just all goes wrong, and then it starts deleting itself and things. It's not quite there yet, but for writing little scripts is great. Problem is, it's also very good at allowing attackers to very quickly turn a vulnerability into exploit code. And I'm now telling the team, don't think that it's going to be 3 to 6 months before an exploit exists for this. I can throw a white paper into ChatGPT. Tell me about this. What is the issue? What is the exploit? Start looking at it, and then go give me some concept code, and then off the back of that, you can then start digging deeper. And from vulnerability to exploit code sometimes can be 15 minutes, and also circumventing the controls that are there can be 10 to 15 minutes, and it would take 3 months a couple of years ago. So it's great for us as well in terms of security, because it can help shore up some issues. It's good for open source intelligence from a point of view of going, right, okay, this is a leaky bucket out here. It's found it, so let's do something with that. But also the attackers, they're using it, absolutely. And before some of the best attackers in the world were brilliant coders. Now it's a lot less to get into that sort of thing. So you get some script kiddies who are just using AI to start throwing stuff, and hey presto, sometimes they'll get in. You've got to be really careful with this stuff.
Yeah, and again, I think the thing we forget about is some businesses will say, we're too small, nobody's going to attack us. But back to that script kiddies, they don't necessarily attack you, do they? They might, literally you can build a port scanner very, very easily.
Yes.
And scan the entire internet if you want. It's not that hard technically.
Yes, absolutely.
So they could just randomly scan IP addresses, and they don't care what they hit.
Absolutely, they absolutely don't. So you've got to be really careful with that sort of thing. And the problem is once they get in as well, if it's not possible to install a bit of software, if you're able to get to Python, you can very quickly just go, right, import the Python FTP dlib and give me something very quickly that allows me to exfiltrate data out. That is something I couldn't have probably done very quickly before. Now I can. So it's, all that sort of stuff's kind of worrying. It worries me as a cybersecurity person.
Okay, cool. I see that you've recently set up some training around mainframes because you struggled to find the right training and certification for people. So you want to tell us a little bit more about that and how you can help people?
Yeah, absolutely. So 3 years ago, even though I've been in this game for about 30 years, 1992 actually, so 33 years. I was running the penetration test team at the bank that I work at, and one of the questions came up: Can you do mainframe penetration tests? And I thought to myself, yeah, absolutely, let's do that. I don't know, it may take me 2 or 3 months to learn enough to be able to do that. How hard can it be? It turned out really difficult because there was nothing there that you could just go to. There were no books at that point that you could just, in fact, still, that you could go to learn about this stuff. There was a bunch of YouTube videos done by one of my friends, Philip Young, and and Chad Rickardrud as well. So it was scattered everywhere. IBM Red Books, you could read those, but there are millions of pages. And again, trying to find when you've not got the lingo, and trust me, the mainframe, all the commands are different. The lingo is different. Memory is called storage. Hard disks are called DASD. You know, you trying to understand what you're looking at was very difficult. So I then went, right, okay, so let's see, there must be a mainframe pen testing course. And there was not at that point. There had been one run, but that had been sold to Broadcom, who were revamping it. And so finally, once I'd spent probably 2 years and I'm still learning, getting to the right point, I decided I'm writing a book for No Starch Press, and so that's an absolute ton of research on hacking mainframes, getting into a little bit of understanding the real need for COBOL code, job control language, and other things like that, Rex scripting especially. It dawned on me that, you know, I really want to teach this sort of thing. So I started the Mainframe Offensive Security Testing course, and it is the only mainframe penetration testing course in the world at the minute. So I run it probably around it once a month over a weekend, and it's great because the last one I had, we had people from Australia, the United States, Denmark, multiple people in Africa and other places like that. So there's a lot of people still interested in this sort of thing, but I felt it was necessary because it's very difficult to learn any of this, and trying to get it into one place is important. Hence the reason for writing the book as well.
Right, awesome. We will put links to your course and so on in the show notes for anyone's interested. And what's the book called?
Hacking Mainframes. It's from No Starch Press. So it hasn't got the full title yet. I had mentioned the title, and they went, no, our marketing team will decide based on the book what the second part of the title is. So to be confirmed. But that has been a really interesting journey, to use a word, a modern word these days, and but it is really good, and you know, I'm looking forward to it coming out, and I think it'll be good. No Starch Press will make it better than I could ever make it myself. So I've got the technical backing as well from some of the best mainframe hackers there are, who've got 30, 40 years of experience. So, you know, it's enjoyable as well. It's different.
Excellent. And when's that due out?
It's going to be in 2026. There's a whole production process that's got to be done. So once I finish my writing, it goes. I've got an editor who keeps on decimating it. Every time I write a chapter, I give it to her, she decimates it, and I fix it. And it goes back again. Then it goes to technical editor, who will look at to make sure absolutely everything is perfect technically. It then goes to the copy editor, then production team, and then out it goes. So I'm hoping to have it completed and out there. Being conservative here by DEF CON 2026. So you're talking another 6 months, I think. So
okay.
10 chapters in, there's 16 chapters, and a lot of the content's there, but it's a crafting process as opposed to a writing process more than anything else.
Yeah, I think people forget that about books. But if you've got a pre-launch website for the book where people can sign up or pre-order, we'll stick that in the show notes as well. I'll get that off you after we've finished. You mentioned DEF CON then, so conferences. We haven't really talked about that. So as my final question for you, what are the conferences that you think people should attend to stay aware of what's going on in the industry in cybersecurity?
I mean, yeah, it depends where you are. I mean, obviously the biggest conferences are Black Hat and DEF CON if it's cybersecurity. These are huge, and obviously both of them are in Las Vegas. So, you know, even I haven't managed to get there yet. I'm definitely open to go next year. It's once in a lifetime thing. Obviously, if you're in Las Vegas, great. Off you go, wander along. 60,000 people attend Black Hat, so it's certainly not a small conference. But I often talk at conferences around Scotland and the UK. So there are smaller ones such as B-Sides are very good. If you're interested in Mainframe, there's a lot of Mainframe conferences. GS UK, which is Share UK, they have a conference in November for 4 days. But there are also a lot of working groups, and they're completely free. And also, there's a lot online. So you can just need to start looking at GS UK or DEFCON or B-Sides or any of these other ones. ScotSec West is another one that I was at recently, but there are equivalents down in England, SACA, any of these. There's lots of stuff. Just look up cybersecurity conferences and away you go. And it's because it's so wide, you get people who are not particularly technical, so don't worry about that. You'll get people who do risk and governance and policy, but you also get, like, if you want to go to DEF CON, super techy, right into the code about how the vulnerability works, how the exploit works, etc. So anything for anybody out there.
Yeah, I guess with everything from that social engineering to hardware penetration, you're going to have all levels of technical knowledge to the social engineering, the people side, and everything in between. And 60,000 at a conference. I mean, that suggests that you're looking at millions and millions of cybersecurity professionals around the world.
There definitely are. If you look at some of the biggest names in cybersecurity, John Hammond and David Bombal, etc., these guys have got millions of followers across their social media platforms and things like that. So absolutely, definitely. One of the conferences I'm talking at GS UK on cybersecurity and pivoting into the mainframe red teaming. I've got a chat on that, but in the same day, it's going to be a very busy day because the Ryan Williams, who runs Hack Magazine, has got Hack the Hills, which is in Melbourne, and I'm doing a talk remotely to Melbourne, so it's going to be an early morning and a mid-afternoon. I'll need to keep going, but that one has got everything from hacking mainframes to covert access and physical security to thinking like an attacker, and some, it's got lots of different stuff there as well. And yeah, so you've got all things for all people, depending on what you're interested in.
It sounds like a fascinating career option and a really interesting area to work.
It definitely is. And even I'm still constantly learning as well. I've just shifted into probably cyber threat intelligence side, which is chasing the bad guys and looking at it's some time to be in that, actually, because it's all year is about. I work with Scarred Spider, and I look at Salt Typhoon, who are pretty much Chinese government, and then you've got all the geopolitical stuff going on, and the interesting things that comes out of attackers from Iran or Russia or wherever. So again, it's not just pure penetration testing; it's now hunting the hackers and understanding where they are and what they're doing. So yeah, it's a lot of these things are really varied.
Sounds like a fascinating field. I've taken up a lot of your time, though, Kev, and I have asked all my questions. So is there anything else you'd like to share with the audience?
No, absolutely loved it. Thanks for inviting me on.
Well, thank you for coming on.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't been much of a coder until the last wee while, but I'm really hugely getting into Python. I think it was probably AI that started me off on that, but now I've realised all the weaknesses that are there and how valuable Python and shell scripting and even COBOL and things like that are. And it's the first thing I learned was back in 1988 at college, where we had a VMS mainframe, which was absolutely ancient even at the time, and it was Fortran and it was COBOL, and then I learned a bit of Pascal. So things change, but in the end of the day, you still need code. So yeah, it's been really interesting. So thanks for inviting me on. I really enjoyed it.
Awesome. Thank you, Kev. Appreciate the time.
No worries.